select Luke Kennard from Duke University.
Bang! Samaje Christian, 3.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Triple Double Podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed your July. Today is August 1st. We're recording this and trying to get the July hangover past us. My name is Corey Albertson of Triple Double Prospects. As always, we've got Jason Morrow of 270 Hoops. And today we've got Coach Dan Evans from Ohio Dominican University. Coach, what's the word?
Nothing much, Corey. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Let me give the rundown real quick. Coach Dan Evans, head coach at Ohio Dominican University, NCAA Division II program out of Columbus that participates in the very, very well-known and respected Division II conference, the GMAC. Coach Evans just completed his 5th season as ODU's head coach, where the Panthers won 20 games, as well as the GMAC conference tournament. Prior to his time at ODU, Coach Evans served for 6 years as an assistant at Hillsdale College, another very well-respected Division II program out of Michigan. So, Coach Evans was hoping, we're going to talk a lot about today about what Division II basketball is, just how quality it is, some of the maybe misconceptions from outsiders on Division II versus Division I. But first, give us a little bit of your background, how you got into coaching, getting the head coaching job at Ohio Dominican, all that good stuff.
Well, I graduated from Lawrence University in 2005 after playing Division III basketball for 4 years. Didn't have much of a plan, didn't necessarily have a real clear path, so I went into the business world and worked for a Fortune 500 company. At the time was called Caremark. Now it's called CVS Caremark. Good job, paid well, all things considered, probably had a really good life, and I was just really, really miserable. And when that was going on, I just reached out to my college coach, who was still at Lawrence at that exact moment, but within a couple months moved on to Hillsdale. And so I got a really low-paying part-time assistant coaching gig, and much to my parents' happiness, I'm sure, I took it. No benefits, no nothing. I just hopped in. I was pretty young. I was 23 probably, may have turned 24 that summer, and just got into it. We had a bunch of success at Hillsdale. Really built a quality program, obviously, that they've continued to sustain over the years. And got to be my 5th or 6th year there, and Coach Tharp just felt like, it was time for me to look for jobs and time for me to kind of look to see if a head coaching gig was going to be possible. I'd been married. I was old enough probably to be an attractive candidate, but still young enough, to seem young, I suppose. And I applied for a few different jobs and had some opportunities. Just felt like here at Ohio Dominican, in Columbus, at the time the GLIAC, now the GMAC, at the level that I knew well, just made a lot of sense. So got really, really lucky on all fronts, and a lot of people contributed to that, both our players back at Hillsdale, Coach Tharp certainly, and then just a little bit of good fortune here in Columbus.
Sure. Well, with Hillsdale, you're looking at a very high academic program, and it's something I'm familiar with because their coaching staff has put a lot of emphasis over the years on recruiting kids in Ohio, and particularly down in Cincinnati. Had several kids go up there and be good players. So, we definitely understand that you got the experience there and, got the head coaching job at relatively young age, considering only being in college coaching for a few years there. And, Ohio Dominican now is located in a good geographic location for recruiting, for attracting kids to come there. It's in a great conference. You guys have won a little bit more each year, slowly building up, and, you're in a powerhouse conference. So how have you really continued to build that program?
Well, I mean, we're pretty committed to building something that can be sustainable for a long period of time. And so we knew, that walking in the door, I mean, we had won maybe 3 games a season in each of the previous 2 seasons before I arrived. So, we weren't walking into a situation that had much foundation, and to be honest, doesn't have a lot of tradition either. Not a lot of history of success. We have some NAI success at like different sort of brief periods over the years. But we knew we could build it in the image that we wanted to. And generally, we're committed to 4-year players, 4 and 5-year players. And we're certainly committed to everybody that we recruit, regardless of how many years they have with us, to be committed to winning, committing to winning on the floor, off the floor, in their personal lives. And we strive, as well as we possibly can to bring in the best people that we possibly can into our program. And we know that'll mean the talent level could vary year to year, and not every kid is the same in terms of talent level, both high end and low end. But we really feel like if we build it the right way with the right kind of people, that we're going to constantly improve and constantly play at our highest level, whatever that may be in a given season or at a given point in time. And, we've had some success doing that. Last year obviously was a big breakthrough for us. We played really, really well for really the final 2 months of the year. I mean, we were tremendous for a long period of time and had a couple good bounces go our way so that we could, cut down a net and go to the NCAA tournament. So really proud of what our entire program has been able to accomplish over the last few years.
Well, that's great to see you guys do that. And, let's talk now about why we're doing this podcast. And I talked to you in the middle evaluation period down in Louisville and told you my idea here, which was, you said you listened to a couple podcasts, and I wanted to do a podcast with a Division II coach. I wanted to do a podcast with a junior college coach and so on, and talk about some of the differences. We'd spend so much time on this podcast talking about Division I stuff. And the first thing I want to talk about with Division II is it gets said a lot, but I don't think people understand just how many great teams and great players come from Division II. You're starting to see that a little bit with, I know the national champion out of Michigan, their best player just transferred to a high major Division I. You're seeing great Division II teams in your conference take down MAC schools in early season games. You're hearing a lot of rumors about these schools beating up on MAC schools and other mid-major, low-major Division Is in close scrimmages. So just talk about the Division II culture, and then I want you to really focus on Ohio for high school for kids that are going to get recruited at the Division II level. There's just so many quality programs within a 3 or 4 hour drive.
Yeah, I mean, I think, people would be alarmed. And I think this applies to all levels of college basketball. People would really be alarmed to sit courtside at a practice or at a game for really any level of college basketball. I mean, it is different. The guys are older, they're more experienced. I'd say generally speaking, they're a little bit more mature as players and emotionally and all that stuff. And so, at our level, you have to be a good player to play. I mean, it's one thing to be on a team at any level. There's guys on teams throughout the country that are okay players. But to be on the floor and to be part of a winning program, I mean, you have really good, talented, committed players. And I think for us in the state of Ohio, I'm sure we have 10, 12, whatever we have, Division II programs, many of which are in the same league. It's tough. It's tough. And I think, to be a winning program and to do that consistently and to maintain that, obviously it takes good fortune, but you have to make sure you have structure in place to recruit the right kind of players. And the right kind of players aren't the same for everybody. Just like, every Big Ten team isn't recruiting the same guy or same guys or same type of guy. The same is true at our level. The teams in our league, we don't all recruit the same kind of guy. Now we have a lot of overlap, but we don't all recruit the same kind of guy. And so everybody's trying to find as many good players that fit their system, their structure, their identity, their culture. And then you try to build and try to get as many of them as you can and allow them to grow together for however long they're with you. And, you hopefully you play at a high enough level over time to grow and continue to sort of rise up the ranks of the league or the level or whatever the case.
With with the guys being a little more mature, I think that's a great point. And this is going to sound like a knock on Division I players, but it's not. But the kid getting recruited Division II is generally a little less coddled by the system, a little less of people telling them how good they are, how great they are. And generally, when I look at kids who I'm scouting, and mostly in the state of Ohio, the difference tends to be negligible from a basketball standpoint. If not, the Division II kid is often a better basketball player, but the difference tends to be athletic ability and not a natural athletic ability. Division II kid is generally smaller, generally not as explosive of an athlete, and tends to be more skilled, a little grittier, a little tougher. And that's what you guys have really made a living off of. And looking at Ohio, if I live in Columbus, Ohio or something, in Ohio you've got great program like Findlay, you've got not just national championship potential team year in and year out. You've got Ohio Dominican, you've got Ashland, you've got Walsh. Kentucky, you've got Bellarmine, national championship contender. Go to West Virginia, you got Fairmont State, Wheeling Jesuit, West Liberty especially. Up to Michigan, you got Ferris State, Hillsdale, all those great programs. So there's a lot of great options. And speaking to it, when these kids now, there's so many transfers is a whole other subject. So many transfers, but when you see all these Division I players transfer down to Division II, there's maybe a misconception in the public that if I'm a Division I player and I don't get in the game at that level and I transfer down to Division II, I'm going to average 25 points a game. That very, very rarely happens. Now, a lot of those kids become good players in time at Division II, but the difference is so minuscule.
Yeah, and what you said at the beginning of that is how I've always felt, which is the most obvious and clear differentiator as you sort of travel between the levels is size and athleticism. Division I guys, the high major guys, look a certain way and are built a certain way and have certain athletic traits. And really, as you move down, for the average player, you get a little smaller and a little less athletic generally. The skill level, the intelligence, all that stuff, I would say, is pretty even mostly. Division I is a bunch of really good shooters and skill guys. So does Division II. So does Division III. So does NAIA. Now one division. So it really is. There are physical differentiators, but every level has really talented guys, really tough guys, really good shooters. Guys that can really play. And there are guys at Division I that obviously would be great Division II players, just like there's guys at Division I that wouldn't be good Division II players. The same is true of our level. We have guys that absolutely could play Division I basketball. I mean, you hear about guys all over the country getting, NBA tryouts on some level, getting these opportunities. We have guys that develop oftentimes over their years, from 18 to 19 to 20 years old, that by the end are certainly capable of playing Division I, just like we have guys at our level that couldn't play Division III, and then obviously it applies to Division III too. And so it is a really difficult business to evaluate 18-year-old, 17-year-old young men and project what they're going to be at 21. I mean, the NBA has millions and millions of dollars of resources. High major basketball has significant resources. And even at those levels, there are mistakes made all the time, or people misevaluated, or people drafted later, and all of a sudden, man, look how good that player is, because it's tough. It's really tough. It's really tough to get to the bottom of what makes this young person tick. Are they going to improve physically, mentally, emotionally, skill-wise? Do they have the characteristics that suggest they're going to improve? And then how do they handle being at the next place? How do they handle being at Ohio Dominican, being at Ohio State, being at the Orlando Magic, whatever, wherever they go on to? How do they adjust to that, and how do they grow? And it's really hard. It's really hard. That's why we as college coaches make mistakes all the time. We make mistakes all the time because it's really tough. It's really tough to evaluate properly.
And evaluating, there's a little bit of a zone. It's almost like a danger zone. You don't want to be in there. And there's only a couple kids, I think, that fall into this every year. And there was one last year in Southwest Ohio that I watched a lot that really fell into this. And if you're a big time athlete, you got a strong body or something, and you don't make it to Division One, if those schools ultimately decide they want to go in a different direction, you can end up out of luck real quick because the Division Two programs tend to favor a little bit different of a guy. And it's interesting. I mean, I see some of these kids, if the D1 doesn't come in, the D2, they're telling me, no, I'd rather have the guy who his athleticism isn't on track with player A, but he understands the game better. He fits our system better. He'll play a role better. And I see that a lot. And I want to talk about a lot of, for the rest of this podcast, really how you go about picking out Division II guys. And one of the themes here is this. It's been said by pretty much everyone in the scouting industry for years. It's very easy to walk in the gym, like you said earlier, and pick out the guy that's a high major talent. So, I mean, the number one pick was DeAndre Ayton. It wouldn't be hard to walk in an AAU game and say, oh, yeah, that kid right there, he's probably pretty good. Yeah, okay, that's obvious. It can be very hard to pick out Division II kids, and it's not necessarily just, here's the 10 best players in the gym, this guy's 11th, so he's probably Division II. That's not necessarily how it works. We'll get into that. But before so, real quick, breakdown for people who aren't aware, Division II recruiting calendar in terms of evaluation, how is it different than Division I?
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend to know every detail of the Division Ones, but we are out a lot more than them in terms of, the calendar. So we are able to go out and evaluate from June 15th. Some of these dates can vary slightly, but more or less June 15th to July 31st or August 1st. So that's our open period in the summer. And then we are back out September, typically the first week of September. So it's like September 7th, I think it was this past year, until high school. Gosh, I might forget this. High school practices begin. And then when our practice begins. So October 15th. And then we are back out again when high school games start.
And then one of the great things about you guys, right? One of the great things about you guys is that you can, during those periods, you're wide open, and you can come to something like my open gym in the fall, like the 270 guys open gym in the fall. There's less restrictions on having to be on that exact player's high school campus.
Let's not put it on us to go to 270 stuff. I mean, that's Zach Fleer and Jason Morrow. God love them, but no, I'm just playing. We go to their stuff all the time.
Right. But no, the Division II, what I wanted you to get at real quick is exactly what you said, which is Division II is much more open. So you're able, it's a little less structured in that. And it also gives, I know you guys have recruiting days and whatnot, but it gives a little bit of an advantage to the guy who's going to be smart with their schedule, the guy who's maybe going to outwork the competition on his schedule. So there's a lot of interesting dynamics when I look at Division II recruiting. But I want to start with, in terms of talking about recruiting, with this. You are someone, every Division II program in 2018, I'm sure, hears this all the time. You're recruiting a kid who would be maybe one of the higher up kids on your list. Maybe not even the top guy, but somebody you'd be very, very interested if they said, Coach, I want to come to Ohio Dominican. And that player tells you, or their family tells you, Coach, thank you. At this point, I'm only interested in Division I's. And I'm not talking about a kid with Division I offers. I'm just talking about a kid who has maybe no offers at this point. So I was talking with a different Division II coach about this in July, and he made a comment to me. He said, when you do that, when as a family, if you decide I'm only interested in Division I, you are no longer selecting a school. You're not selecting a program. You're not selecting a coach that you want to play for. You're not selecting a fit in terms of a role on a team and in life and academics, but you're selecting a level. You're saying, I want my kid to go to a low major, mid-major university, when that could mean a whole lot of things in terms of fit.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real challenge. I think it's a real challenge on both sides of the aisle on that front. We're trying to get, in general, the best player we can, and oftentimes the best players that end up in our level were at one time Division I targets, or were at one time sort of trending toward that. And for whatever reason, it didn't pan out for them, or they didn't get the opportunities, or who knows. And so those are the players we're trying to get. And then on the other side of the aisle, there's a real sort of cultural pressure and prestige that comes with saying you're a Division I basketball player. They're regardless of the realities, both positive and negative, I'm sure, that's the way it is. It means something more for whatever reason in the normal mainstream world to say you're a Division I basketball player. Whether you ever play almost doesn't even matter in the sort of cultural sense. Just being on a roster oftentimes is seen as more valuable. I totally understand that. I can remember being, 17 years old and tried to tell my parents that I thought I was a Division I basketball player, and sending, I assume we had email, but sending email, to all these lower level schools. And I look back on it, I was not even anything close to a Division I player. But even I felt in my high school and the level I played at wasn't, didn't send many kids to that level at all. But I succumbed to the same sort of pressure and, just sort of cultural push toward that level. And it's hard. It's hard when you're a really talented kid who's the best player, in his high school, in his area, in his league, in his city, who knows. And, you want that for yourself. And by extension, your parents oftentimes want that for you, for your well-being and for their own, identity. It's really hard to fight that, both on our side and their side. It's a very difficult thing to fight. And I think as frustrated as we may get as Division II coaches, I don't think it's very hard to see why it's that way, or why some guys will hold out as long as they possibly can. And, like the example that you described, sometimes holding out as long as you can sort of eliminates opportunities you would have had,
Absolutely.
And it's tough. I mean, it's really tough. There's not a great solution to it. It's just a matter of trying to communicate and be open, and probably us as coaches on some level, not writing that young man off, just giving them the time and the space and to kind of see where their path takes them. But certainly we are also invested in recruiting guys that are willing to listen, and willing to entertain the possibility of playing for our program, and, seem like more viable candidates. And it's a very difficult sort of road to walk, I think, for both coaches and young people and families.
You brought up something I hadn't thought of in preparing for this, which is the timetable. I think there's been a huge trend the last few years of Division II programs, quality Division II programs, especially identifying kids that value a fit, value a role on a team, an academic situation close to home, whatever that may be, and early in the process. And, we've got 3 really, really good point guards in Ohio in the class of 2019 that 2 of them committed after the summer after their junior. After their junior year. And no, I'm sorry, the summer after their sophomore year. And now another one's committed the summer after his junior year at your old school, Hillsdale. And you're seeing a thing with Division IIs where they're really trying to get on these guys early. And that's exactly another thing you see is sometimes if you think, well, that Division II school that offered me as a family, they're always going to be there. They want my son so bad. I'll tell you, to be honest, they probably don't. Yeah, they want your son. They offered a scholarship, but they're going to move on to the next guy. And, it's important to understand that you guys want talent just like anybody else. But as you go down levels, nobody wants to be coaching a kid who's not happy there. So you would much rather, as Ohio Dominican's coach or any Division II coach, rather have a guy who wants to be in your program, is proud to be in your program, versus somebody who, feels like they're better, even if they are, if they're not, or is constantly looking around. We've talked about transfers again, and you don't want to be in position to re-recruit your players every single year.
I think what you're saying is right on. I mean, there is a value to having a team full of guys that are excited to be at your school, in your program, I don't even know if that applies to level as much, but certainly at your school, in your program. And some young people and some families are a little bit more zeroed in on what they want, whatever that may be. And sometimes that can work to our benefit, like the situations that you're talking about. Sometimes you get early, very early commitments, though I think that's pretty rare in reality at our level, but you certainly get, summertime commitments at times, and certainly fall commitments, because people maybe have a clearer picture or know more about the situation or are more familiar with your school or the level at certain cases. But yeah, I mean, we want people who are going to be excited to play for Ohio Dominican basketball. And I don't think we're alone in that. I think that's how most people are. And I think it's a matter of, resources. You want your resources, in this case, your scholarship dollars, to be going toward people who are 100% committed to being a good quality member of your program, and by extension, a really good player for you. And if someone doesn't seem that way, or doesn't come off that way, or just doesn't seem as committed in the recruiting process, I mean, it definitely, is something that gets taken into account, as we evaluate and sort of lay out our own recruiting board.
Well, let me put you on the spot there. And this is a tough one, and I gave you this to think about early, so maybe you put a little thought into it. But there was a tweet on this subject, and this is, I guess, kind of our new thing with the Triple Double podcast, is we're doing the Twitter reviews, because we did that last week with TJ Petrus. But there was a tweet, and I forget who put the original tweet out. I should have wrote it down, but I didn't. And the original tweet was this: if less than 4% of players make it to NCAA Division I, II, or III, why is it considered an insult to tell a kid he's a Division II or Division III player? And then former Ohio high school legend Seth Towns, he's now at Harvard, really, really good player. He had a really interesting response tweet to it, and I have been thinking about it for like 3 days, and I go back and forth on what I think about it. I think it's just extremely thought-provoking. And his response was this: if you dreamed of being CEO and someone told you that you were general manager material, would you be insulted? Do you think that relates to the original comment there?
I don't know. I know better than to argue with someone who's at Harvard. I know better than that. But I do think, it's a difficult spot, because for some people, when someone tells you, hey, you're a Division II player, you're a Division III player, it may be perceived as an insult, but it's more about the sort of picture you had in your mind for what you were going to be, or who you were going to be. And so I think it's not so much insulting as it is sort of a challenge to the dreams that they may have, similar to like what he referenced. And I don't fault any young person, quite honestly, for feeling any type of way, because it is hard. It is hard. If I'm a 16-year-old person and people in my neighborhood keep telling me how good a basketball player I am, and keep telling me, oh, you're going to be Division I, you're going to be Division I, and it's not materializing, that's a hard thing to handle. And so, if I'm that same 16-year-old and a Division II coach is calling me and like, hey, I'm interested, and, I may not be that interested. And if I have a recruiting analyst, or I have another high school coach, or another college coach telling me, hey, you're just not a Division I player, I'm 16 years old, that might hurt me. That absolutely might hurt me. But, I was a Division III player, and I was a middle of the road Division III player at that, probably. I was on a very good team, but not necessarily anything close to our most important player. And I was a really good high school basketball player in my area. I think I was the area player of the year, and we went to the, Sweet 16 of the Illinois State tournament. I mean, like, I was in a small way a big deal, but I wasn't anywhere close to even a Division II player. But when I was 17, if someone told me certain things, like, yeah, I might have been hurt, but I don't. It's hard. And I think When you have a picture in your mind and that picture is either not going that way or people are telling you that that picture is wrong, that can be hard to handle at any age.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is, obviously no one's saying you're this or that player as a personal thing 99% of the time, that is. It's really right. It's a business thing. And, we've had people, Brian Snow came on this podcast early on and said, it's a 100% failure industry and that stuff happens. But in terms of this, big picture is this. When, one of the big sayings in college basketball, AAU basketball, is when your 17U season ends in July, you are the level you're being recruited on. And what that means is if all Division IIs are calling you and no Division I's calling you, well, you're probably a Division II player. And again, that evaluation might not be correct, but that's the reality of the situation. And I've always been taught in dealing with AAU people and talking to college coaches, the best mindset I think a family, a AAU coach, a high school coach can have for their kid is this: go to the school that wants you most. If somebody's just kind of half-ass recruiting you and, well, maybe we'll take you if our top guys don't commit, they go somewhere else, that generally only works okay. But if a guy's busting your door down saying, hey, we really want you, we really want your son to be a part of the program, basketball, non-basketball, whatever, happiness of the young man generally goes much, much better.
Yeah, I definitely think obviously the schools that show the most interest in you, obviously they're going to be more invested in, who you are as a player, and for a program like ours, we're invested in who you are as a player, as a person, as a student, all that stuff. And I think that is true. But, you have to go to a place that fits you and that you're going to be happy at. And, if some young man just doesn't see himself, and we have certainly run into this situation, sometimes in sort of heartbreaking fashion, but if he doesn't see himself at your place, it doesn't matter any of the other stuff. It doesn't matter how bad you want him. If he doesn't see himself at your place, you probably don't even want him to commit to you. If he doesn't see it. Now, if he sees it, and one of the reasons is because you want him so bad, that's awesome. That is awesome. But I certainly agree with the idea that the level that's recruiting you, the people that you're hearing from, that's the level you are at that moment. The idea of, oh, I got a letter from so-and-so, telling me they're interested, but I don't ever hear from anyone. And I'm not even talking you need to hear from them every day. I just mean like, hey, occasionally I get a text, occasionally I get a call. They're probably not recruiting you. And this happens a lot for us at our level, because there are, the Division I world does a great job of understanding and broadly recruiting their area, their region, the country for certain schools, obviously. And so when these kids are 14, 15, 16, they are hearing from Division I's. That's not uncommon, but sometimes it can go away. And if you're not talking to them anymore, what does that mean? It's just honestly, it's a really complicated process for young people and families. But I certainly agree with the idea that whatever level is recruiting you, whatever level is offering you, that's the level you are at that moment. And generally, that's what you're going to be.
You used a good word. Right, you used a good word in offering, because there's so many kids that tell me, I say, who's recruiting you right now? Well, I talked to Ashland, I talked to Finley, I talked to Ohio Dominican, I talked to Malone, and then West Virginia really likes me. Well, how do you know West Virginia likes you? Well, they sent me this letter, or they sent me 20 letters. Well, they sent everybody 20 letters, and yeah. It's understanding that. So I think you hit it on the head with offering. And then, Division II, I'm going to get to the point, which is I think there's a whole lot of kids that are Division II quality, and some fit and some don't. But I think with Division II, I know we talked earlier about there not being a ton of overlap maybe with what you want versus other schools in the GMAC want versus, some of the West Virginia schools, what they might want a Division II player. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of competitive recruiting that goes on in-state, and it can be really interesting to follow. I like following it from a scouting standpoint. You don't necessarily see it a lot with Division I. They have resources sometimes, especially when you go mid-major or high major, especially to look around different regions. But Division II, I can generally look at a kid after a few evaluations when he's 16 and say, well, here are the 5 or 6 schools that are really, really going to get after it, trying to get this kid. So just talk about just kind of the competitiveness and recruiting among Division II programs in the area.
Yeah, I mean, it can be, it's a real challenge. I mean, it is certainly a real challenge. And I think I'm not surprised you feel that way, because I do think there's a lot of truth in that you can tell at some points, like, hey, this guy just is a Division II player, like whether it's he's a little less athletic but has everything else, or, maybe he's a little bit short on skill but has enough athletic, there's these certain sort of indicators that's like, that guy's probably going to end up in our league or in our level. I mean, I think that happens a lot. The thing that is so interesting about it is one of the major differences between our level and the Division I level is, not everybody is a full scholarship player. And so there sometimes is this sort of misunderstanding or misperception that everybody who plays at any Division II program is a full scholarship. And it's just not real. I think we'd love it to be real. That'd be great. Every coach in our league and every league in the country would be thrilled, but, we don't operate the same way Division I's. They have 13 full scholarships and they give them, or whatever amount of them they want to give, under that 13. For schools at our level, it generally is a combination of, you have some full scholarship guys, some partial scholarship guys, and some non-scholarship guys. And so I think that stuff even makes those recruiting battles you're talking about even more complicated. There are times certainly where we're recruiting a guy and we're willing to make him a full scholarship player, but other people in our league and in our region, they may not like him as much. So for them, he's a tuition only or something, and it happens vice versa. And so it truly is an interesting process to see where everybody falls, how they shake out, who likes what guys, who thinks they fit guys well, or fit their programs well. But we definitely have a lot more situations where, multiple schools within our state, within our league, will offer the same kid. And I think that may happen a little bit more for us than it might happen at the next level.
Definitely. And as speaking to what you talked about with the scholarships is, so anyone who doesn't understand knows that, so Division I, you get 13 full scholarships and you cannot break those up. Meaning if you were offered a scholarship at Division I for men's basketball, women's basketball, or football, it is a full scholarship offer. Now, if you're playing a different sport, they might be able to give you 25%, 50%, whatever percent. Division II has full power to do that. And it's funny, I was talking to one coach, Division II coach, within a month ago, and he told me that he lost a kid a couple years ago over $500. And when you're talking about schools that can be in the $30,000 to $40,000 range, and this kid's family happened to be really, really wealthy, and could have easily afforded full tuition, but it's kind of adds another level to the recruiting when you start talking about the money end of it. So that's really interesting. So let's talk about this then. We started with this earlier. Let's come back to it, which is, again, easy to identify Division I players, especially if they're a high major player. Again, with the athleticism, there's a lot of conversation you hear when a kid falls to Division II. Usually they're a really, really good player, and it goes, well, man, if that kid was 2 inches taller, he'd be in the MAC, he'd be in the Horizon. Sometimes that's true, and it's not true. But with quality Division IIs, I look at some guys who've played in Final Fours, Elite Eights, at Division II level. They're not afraid to not recruit off of recruiting lists. They're not necessarily worried about rankings. They're worried about fit. They will substitute talent for fit, and they really know how to find guys. And you talked about some of the basic intangibles, but from a basketball standpoint, when you're evaluating AAU games, what are you looking for in a kid that's would be a good fit at not just Ohio Dominican, but at, let's just say, the GMAC in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. I mean, the reality is you're looking for all the measurables. That's always going to be the first thing you notice. How tall do they seem? How, what's their frame like? Not only is what their frame is like today, but what does it at least appear that they could maybe be at some point as they grow up. And then you're kind of moving on to the athleticism, the thing you can just physically, you can just see. Does he move faster than the other people on the court? Who are the other people on the court? How good are they? Does he jump higher? Does he, use, physical strength better? And then you're moving on to this sort of, skill things. What does his shot look like? Does he pass the ball well? Does he seem to have good vision? Does he know what he's doing? Does he talk? Does he communicate? Does it appear that he knows how to play? Does he rebound the ball well? And obviously these things vary for each position, but you're judging the things you can see in front of you. And then you either before or after, depending on, when you're seeing this person, now you're trying to get to the intangible things that you just have no way to measure in the moment. When I'm sitting at the Louisville tournament, whatever it was called, I don't even remember now, but I'm not going to know everything about playing for the first time. I'm not going to know what his grades are oftentimes or at certain points of the season. I might not know how hard a worker is. I might not know, his backstory. And so then you're digging into all those things after the fact or, and depending on time of year, again, beforehand. And so you're really just trying to do your best to peg. And then you're using other players as a barometer. Okay, I know that guy is committed to some Division I school. Does the guy I'm watching seem better or worse than him? Does he seem bigger or more athletic than him? Okay, that guy's going to the Big Ten. Okay, my guy seems like he's not even close to that good. That might mean nothing. That might mean something. Okay, my guy's going to the MAC, or the guy next to him's going to the MAC, and my guy's a lot better than him. Well, I may be able to recruit him for a certain point, for a certain amount of time, but there's going to be a point where people realize that, hey, he's better than he's being recruited right now. And so you're just sort of synthesizing all that stuff as well as you can. And for some programs that are doing that, in July of their junior, before their junior year. For other programs, it's July going into their senior year. That's happening at different sort of points, I think, for different Division II programs.
Because you're looking at a broad spectrum of intangible skill and you're a little less in general worried about athleticism and size, I think it opens up.
I don't want to call it worried about, because it's just a matter of like threshold. You know what I mean? Like Division II coaches, we're just as worried about it. There's just more guys that meet our athletic threshold in general. You know what I mean? Than meet the max athletic threshold. So it's not that we're not worried about it. It's just there's just a larger pool of guys that sort of can hit it.
Okay, so that makes sense. So there's a larger pool of guys that can fit that threshold for the GMAC in particular. And because of that, I think you guys tend to you guys tend to evaluate a larger spectrum of kids. You guys tend to evaluate kids who are getting highly recruited on the Division I level all the way up to the MAC horizon. You tend to evaluate kids who are getting recruited at the Division III level. And you've got to look at a huge, huge variety of kids from all over Ohio. I know you guys probably touched some other states too. How do you really make sure that you turn over every single rock?
Truthfully, Corey, it's, people like you are a big help. We don't have a bunch of full-time staff members, and so we're trying to rely on the connections and relationships that we may have, both with, recruiting analysts and scouts like yourself, to high school coaches, to AAU coaches, and we're trying to do our best to see everybody. And like, I would be the first to admit that, like, we don't know everything about everybody. We try, but we're always finding young men or seeing young men more during their senior season, and it alters our evaluation. Or
that's what I, Coach. That's what I wanted you to jump on, which is talk about this real quick. Division I, and it's starting to trend towards being more like yours. But Division I, you see the recruiting process start a little earlier. I've seen statistics about, I think it's like roughly 80% of kids who end up playing Division I sports at any sport are identified by like the end of their sophomore year or something. I don't know if that's true, but it seems reasonable. Division II, because of the way you guys recruit and some of the resources, you guys start the recruiting process a little later in the high school career.
I think generally that's true. Part of that, I think, is a reflection of just resources and manpower. And I think part of that's a reflection of there's a lot of development that still occurs for guys that end up at our level. There's a lot of development that's still going to occur during their junior season and even during their senior season, whereas Division I caliber players generally are further along earlier because of some of the physical abilities they have. But Division I's obviously take a bunch of guys late as well. And obviously there's an incredibly high transfer rate, at most levels within basketball programs. And so there are certainly mistakes that are made as a result, and that affects the high school recruiting too, so it's really a sort of complicated cycle, but definitely ours is occurring later in a general sense.
Okay, cool. Well, that was great insight, Coach. We're out of time here, so let's wrap it up. But, for everyone listening, I think we got great insight from Coach Evans on exactly what some of those misconceptions are about Division II, how similar Division II and Division I are in terms of basketball, and some of the differences we broke down on such a nuanced technical level that they're, from a broad spectrum are very, very small differences, especially when you look at something like the MAC or the Horizon League, the low to mid-major basketball being played versus Division II at the highest level, which is what Ohio Dominican competes on. So again, guys, that was Coach Dan Evans, head basketball coach for several years now at Ohio Dominican University. For Jason Morrow of 270 Hoops, I'm Corey Albertson, and you have listened to the Triple Double Podcast.